Tonight, you are not here by accident. There are moments when the noise of the world grows quiet enough for truth to slip through, and this is one of them. What you are about to hear is not a lecture, not a sermon, not even inspiration in the way most people understand it. It is a remembrance, a return to something ancient, simple, and powerful that has been buried beneath misunderstanding and fear. In his later years, when reputation no longer mattered and time stripped away the need for approval, Joseph Murphy spoke differently. Not louder, but clearer. Not to impress, but to reveal. And among those final insights was a prayer he rarely spoke of publicly, not because it was complex, but because it was dangerous in the hands of the unprepared. This prayer does not beg. It does not plead with the universe or kneel before a distant power. It does not wait. It does not hope. It does not ask for permission. It declares, it assumes. It moves from certainty, not desperation. And that is precisely why so few are taught to use it. Most people are comfortable asking. Very few are comfortable claiming. Yet the law of life does not respond to need. It responds to belief. It does not answer tears. It answers conviction. Many have been taught that prayer is an act of humility, but humility has been misunderstood. True humility is not denying your power. It is recognizing the source of it. To shrink yourself, to plead, to speak as though you are separate from the very intelligence that formed you, is not humility at all. It is ignorance dressed as reverence. The prayer Joseph Murphy hinted at in his final days was not spoken outward toward the sky, but inward toward the deepest chamber of the mind where belief is formed and reality is shaped. The subconscious mind is not persuaded by eloquent words or emotional begging. It does not respond to logic or moral arguments. It responds to assumption, to what is accepted as true. It accepts without question what you consistently feel to be real. And once accepted, it moves with mechanical precision to express that assumption as experience. This is the law that never sleeps. This is the servant that never disobeys. And this is why most lives reflect not what people want, but what they secretly believe. The forgotten prayer begins where all creation begins, with identity. Every time you say, "I am," you are completing a sentence the subconscious must act upon. It does not matter whether the words are spoken aloud or whispered silently in the privacy of thought. The declaration is registered. When a person says, "I am tired," the body responds. When one says, "I am unlucky," events align. When one says, "I am always struggling," struggle becomes familiar. These are not figures of speech, they are decrees. Joseph Murphy understood that the words "I am" are not descriptive, they are creative. They are the verbal symbol of being itself. Whatever follows them is impressed upon the subconscious as a fact of identity, and the subconscious, having no sense of humor, no skepticism, no moral filter, begins organizing circumstances to confirm that identity. This is why careless speech becomes costly over time. And this is why the forgotten prayer is built entirely upon disciplined, deliberate use of "I am." Most prayers fail because they are spoken from awareness of lack. A person prays for health while feeling sick. They pray for abundance while fearing bills. They pray for love while believing they are unworthy. The words ask for one thing, but the feeling declares another, and the subconscious always sides with feeling. It does not bring what you ask for. It brings what you expect. It brings what you assume to be true. This is the error the forgotten prayer corrects. Instead of asking for "what is missing," the forgotten prayer assumes fulfillment. It speaks as one already in possession. It does not say, "I will be healed." It says, "I am whole." It does not say, "I hope abundance comes." It says, "I am supplied." It does not say, "Someday I will be free." It says, "I am free now." These are not affirmations spoken to convince the conscious mind. They are decrees spoken to condition the subconscious. In the final phase of his work, Joseph Murphy emphasized that repetition alone is not enough. Words repeated mechanically remain on the surface of the mind. But words felt, imagined, and accepted sink deep. The subconscious learns through emotional experience. When you declare, "I am healthy," you must feel what health feels like. The ease of breath, the lightness of movement, the calm certainty of well-being. The feeling is the bridge between word and belief. Without it, The prayer remains hollow. There was once a man who came to Murphy after years of praying for relief from debt. Each night he asked, begged, pleaded, and each morning he woke with the same anxiety. Murphy told him to stop praying the way he had been taught. He told him to stop informing God of his problems and start informing his subconscious of the solution. Each night before sleep, he was to say quietly, I am supplied. I am supported by infinite abundance. All my needs are met now. He was to imagine paying his bills with ease, to feel relief, to rest in the assumption of provision. Within months, his circumstances reorganized. Opportunities arose, income increased. The law responded exactly as it always does. This was not magic, it was not chance, it was not divine favoritism, it was alignment. The forgotten prayer works because it removes contradiction. It teaches the mind to speak from the end, not the middle, to assume the state desired as already accomplished. And when the subconscious accepts that assumption, it must externalize it. There is no alternative. The law is impersonal. It does not judge worthiness. It responds to belief. Many resist this prayer because it feels uncomfortable at first. To declare health while feeling pain feels dishonest. To declare abundance while facing lack feels arrogant. But this discomfort comes from identifying with appearances rather than truth. Appearances are effects. They are echoes of past assumptions. The forgotten prayer speaks to causes. It speaks to the level where change begins. It is not denial of reality. It is selection of a higher one. When you say, I am whole, you are not lying. You are affirming the blueprint from which the body is designed. When you say, I am abundant, you are not ignoring your bank account. You are aligning with the source from which supply flows. When you say, I am loved, you are not pretending loneliness does not exist. You are affirming the presence of love as a principle that must express itself once accepted. Joseph Murphy often said that the subconscious mind is like soil. It does not care what seed you plant. It does not argue. It does not discriminate. It simply grows whatever is impressed upon it. Fear grows fear. Faith grows faith. Confidence grows confidence. The forgotten prayer is conscious planting. It is the refusal to scatter seeds at random. It is choosing deliberately what you will grow. This prayer is especially powerful in the moments before sleep. As the conscious mind relaxes, resistance fades. The subconscious becomes open, receptive, impressionable. Whatever you accept as true in that state sinks deep and becomes the pattern your life follows. This is why the final thought of the day is so important. It is the last command given before the mind goes to work shaping tomorrow. There was a woman who suffered from constant anxiety, unable to sleep, unable to rest. She prayed endlessly for peace, but replayed her worries each night. Murphy taught her to reverse the process. Each night she was to say, I am calm. I am at peace. Divine order governs my life. She was to imagine herself sleeping deeply, waking refreshed. At first the words felt foreign, but repetition softened resistance. Within weeks, her nervous system responded. Peace became natural. The subconscious obeyed the new instruction. The forgotten prayer does not require strain. It requires persistence. A single declaration may not undo years of conditioning, but consistent assumption reshapes belief. Water does not break stone through force, but through constancy. In the same way, belief forms not through intensity alone, but through repetition infused with feeling. This is why the prayer must be lived, not merely spoken. Speech discipline becomes destiny discipline. Every casual I am spoken in frustration is a prayer. Every joke made at your own expense is an instruction. The subconscious does not recognize sarcasm. It records, it accepts, it builds. To say, I am always tired is to program fatigue. To say, I am terrible with money is to instruct lack. The forgotten prayer restores awareness of this power and demands responsibility. Some fear this responsibility. It is easier to blame fate, luck, or circumstance than to examine inner speech. But once seen, it cannot be unseen. The throne of your life is never empty. Something is always speaking from it. The question is whether that voice is conscious or conditioned. The forgotten prayer places you back on the throne. In his final reflections, Joseph Murphy emphasized that this prayer is not used to control others or manipulate outcomes. It works inward first. As inner states change, Outer conditions follow naturally. When you assume confidence, your behavior changes. When you assume abundance, your decisions shift. When you assume peace, your reactions soften. The world responds to the version of you that shows up. This is why the prayer is so effective. It changes identity, and identity determines action. Action determines result. The prayer is not an escape from effort. It is the alignment that makes effort effective. Without it, action is forced. With it, action is inspired. There was a man who believed he was cursed with failure. Every venture collapsed. Every attempt ended the same way. His hidden prayer was a quiet constant. I am unlucky. When he learned this, he resisted at first, but he began to replace it with, I am guided. Success flows to me naturally. Night after night, he impressed this new identity. Slowly, his confidence returned. Opportunities appeared. The curse dissolved. Nothing mystical occurred. Only a change in assumption. The forgotten prayer is not about pretending. It is about selecting. Selecting which identity you will occupy. Selecting which assumption you will feed. Selecting which future you will allow to grow. The subconscious cannot serve two masters. The dominant assumption always wins. Make faith more familiar than fear, and faith will rule. This prayer also dissolves resentment and guilt, which often block manifestation. Resentment is a declaration that the past controls the present. Guilt is a declaration that you are unworthy. Both are assumptions the subconscious accepts and enforces. When you declare, I am forgiven, I am free, you are not excusing behavior. You are releasing identification. The body, the mind, and circumstances respond to that release. A woman once held anger so deeply it manifested as illness. When she learned to affirm forgiveness, not toward others, but toward herself, her health returned. The subconscious, no longer instructed to hold tension, restored balance. This is not coincidence, it is cause and effect. The forgotten prayer is simple, but simplicity does not mean weakness. Fire is simple, gravity is simple, yet they govern worlds. The power of this prayer lies in its consistency and clarity. It does not ask what might happen, it declares what is. And life organizes around that declaration. Many will hear this and dismiss it. They will say words cannot change reality. Yet their lives are shaped daily by the words they believe. Others will hear and feel fear because responsibility feels heavy at first. But those who practice it discover freedom. Not because life becomes perfect, but because they are no longer at war with themselves. Joseph Murphy never presented this prayer as a guarantee of instant results. He presented it as a law. Laws operate whether you believe in them or not. The difference is awareness. To know the law is to use it consciously. To ignore it is to use it unconsciously. Either way, it operates. The forgotten prayer is not reserved for saints or scholars. It is available to anyone willing to speak deliberately, imagine vividly, and persist patiently. It asks only that you stop declaring against yourself, that you stop reinforcing what you wish to escape, that you choose words that align with the life you want to live. When you say, I am whole, say it until it feels natural. When you say, I am abundant, say it until fear loosens its grip. When you say, I am guided, say it until doubt quiets. Do not argue with the mind, train it. The subconscious learns through repetition, not debate. As this prayer becomes habit, you will notice something subtle. Your inner dialogue shifts, your reactions soften, your expectations rise. And as they do, the world responds, not because it has changed, but because you have. This is the prayer Joseph Murphy spoke of with reverence near the end of his life. Not because it was secret, but because it was sacred. Not because it was complicated, because it was exact. It cannot fail because it is always working. The only question is in whose favor. You are always praying. The forgotten prayer simply teaches you to pray on purpose. And now, as this understanding settles, let the final truth remain. You do not become what you want. You become what you assume. Choose wisely what follows your I am, for it is shaping your life even now. And as you move forward with this understanding, something quietly shifts within you. You begin to notice that life has never been resisting you. It has only been reflecting you. Every delay, every repetition, every familiar pattern was not punishment, but obedience. Obedience to an inner decree spoken, so often it became law. When this realization settles in, blame dissolves, fear loosens, and responsibility transforms from a burden into freedom. Joseph Murphy often said that the subconscious mind is the most faithful servant you will ever know. It does not question your commands. It does not pause to evaluate whether they are wise or foolish. It simply carries them out with precision. This is why two people can live in the same world, under the same conditions, and experience entirely different lives. The difference is not luck. It is assumption. It is what each has quietly accepted as true about themselves. The forgotten prayer is not meant to be dramatic. It is meant to be constant. It is not something you perform once and abandon. It is something you live, a way of speaking, thinking, and feeling that becomes so natural it no longer feels like prayer at all. It feels like identity, and once identity changes, struggle fades, because you are no longer trying to become what you already assume yourself to be. There is a subtle confidence that comes from this prayer. Not arrogance, not force, but calm certainty. You stop chasing outcomes and start expecting alignment. You stop asking if things will work out and start assuming they will. This assumption does not make you passive. It makes you clear. Action taken from clarity carries power. Action taken from fear carries friction. In his later years, Murphy spoke often about peace as the greatest manifestation. Not because peace avoids challenge, but because peace dissolves resistance. A peaceful mind impresses harmony. A harmonious mind produces orderly outcomes. When you declare, "I am at peace," and feel it, you are not escaping the world. You are reordering it from the inside. This prayer also reveals why impatience weakens results. The subconscious operates beyond the conscious sense of time. It moves according to acceptance, not urgency. When you constantly check for results, you declare doubt. When you rest in assumption, you declare faith. Faith is not effort. It is ease. It is the absence of inner argument. There was once a student who practiced the forgotten prayer for weeks and then stopped, saying nothing had changed. Murphy asked him one question: "Have you stopped feeling yourself to be the old man?" The student realized he was still reacting the same way, expecting the same outcomes, fearing the same endings. The words had changed, but the identity had not. The prayer works when it becomes self-concept, not decoration. This is why the prayer must be protected, not defended outwardly, but guarded inwardly. Negative conversations, habitual complaints, repeated stories of failure all dilute the impression. You do not need to fight them. You simply replace them. When an old thought arises, you answer with a new decree, calmly, firmly, without emotion. Over time, the old voice weakens. The new one becomes dominant. The forgotten prayer does not eliminate challenges. It eliminates hopelessness. It removes the belief that you are at the mercy of circumstances. You may still face effort, but you no longer face despair. You move through difficulty with an inner assurance that resolution is inevitable because you have already accepted it internally. Murphy warned that the most dangerous prayer is spoken casually. A passing, "I am so stupid," a habitual, "I always mess things up," a resigned, "This is just how my life is." These are not harmless expressions. They are instructions. The forgotten prayer teaches reverence for language, not because words are sacred in themselves, but because belief is. As you practice this prayer, you may notice resistance arise, old emotions surface. Doubt protests. This is not failure. It is evidence of reconditioning. When new assumptions challenge old ones, friction appears briefly. Persistence smooths it out. The subconscious eventually yields to the most consistently impressed idea. It always does. The prayer also brings compassion. When you realize that others are living out their own unconscious decrees, judgment softens. You see that anger, fear, and limitation are not personal flaws, but conditioned beliefs. This does not excuse harm, but it frees you from carrying it. You focus inward, where real change begins. Joseph Murphy never claimed ownership of this prayer. He always pointed back to the law itself. The law existed long before him and will exist long after. He simply reminded those who were ready to listen. In his final days, he spoke less about technique and more about trust. Trust in the law. Trust in the subconscious. Trust in the power of assumption rightly used. The forgotten prayer is not about controlling life. It is about cooperating with it. When you align inner belief with desired outcome, life does the rest. Doors open not because you force them, but because they were never locked to begin with. As this truth settles, you may feel a quiet resolve form. A decision to speak differently, to think more carefully, to assume more generously. This is the beginning of mastery. Not mastery over others, but mastery over self. And that is the only mastery that lasts. Remember this above all: you are never neutral. You are always impressing something. If you do not choose the decree, habit will choose it for you. The forgotten prayer is simply the conscious choice to participate in your own becoming. And so, as you move on from these words, let one thing remain clear. The power you have been seeking has never been absent. It has only been unclaimed. It waits in every I am you speak. It responds faithfully. It never fails. What you assume, you become. What you accept, you express. And what you consistently declare, life must obey. And when this realization becomes steady within you, a strange calm replaces striving. You stop searching for signs because you understand that signs follow belief, not the other way around. You stop bargaining with life because you no longer feel separate from it. The forgotten prayer matures into something quieter than words. It becomes a state of being. Joseph Murphy often said that the greatest mistake people make is trying to force belief. They strain, they argue, they attempt to overpower doubt. But belief is not created through conflict. It is created through familiarity. Whatever the mind grows used to, it accepts. Whatever it accepts, it expresses. The prayer works not because it is dramatic, but because it is repeated until it feels normal. This is why small, consistent declarations carry more power than emotional outbursts. A calm "I am safe" spoken nightly reshapes the nervous system more effectively than a desperate plea spoken once. A quiet "I am guided" repeated daily does more than 100 frantic questions. The subconscious trusts what is steady. In time, you will notice that your inner world becomes less reactive. Situations that once triggered fear no longer have the same grip. Problems still arise, but they no longer define you. You see them as temporary rearrangements, not permanent verdicts. This shift alone changes outcomes because life responds differently to someone who expects resolution. The forgotten prayer also teaches patience without passivity. You act when action is natural. You wait when waiting is wise. You are no longer driven by panic or urgency because you are no longer trying to prove anything. The assumption has already been accepted. The outer world is simply catching up. There was a man who practiced this prayer for months without visible change, yet something subtle occurred. His tone softened. His posture changed. His decisions became clearer. One day opportunity appeared suddenly, but in truth it had been approaching all along. He was finally aligned enough to receive it. This is how the law works. It prepares you before it presents. Murphy emphasized that the subconscious not only attracts circumstances, it also inspires ideas. The right thought at the right moment, the right words spoken without effort, the right action taken instinctively. These are not accidents. They are the natural result of alignment. When you declare, "I am guided," guidance appears as intuition. This prayer does not remove responsibility, it clarifies it. You become responsible not for forcing outcomes, but for maintaining assumption. You learn to ask one simple question in every moment: what am I accepting as true right now? And if the answer does not match the life you desire, you gently replace it. The forgotten prayer also dissolves the fear of failure. When identity is no longer tied to outcomes, mistakes lose their sting. You no longer see setbacks as proof of unworthiness, but as feedback. This freedom alone opens paths that fear kept closed. Joseph Murphy often returned to one idea in his later years: the subconscious is never wrong. It is always accurate. If life feels chaotic, it is because the inner command has been unclear. If life feels heavy, it is because the inner decree has been heavy. Change the decree, and clarity follows. As this understanding deepens, you may find yourself speaking less, but with more intention. Words become chosen, not automatic. Complaints lose their appeal. Negative predictions feel unnatural. You are not suppressing anything. You are simply no longer interested in rehearsing what you do not want to experience. The forgotten prayer does not isolate you from others. It strengthens connection. When you are no longer silently declaring lack, comparison fades. Envy fades. You stop measuring your worth against appearances. You meet others from fullness, not need. Relationships soften. Communication improves. This too is manifestation. Murphy once said that the law of belief is the most loving law in the universe because it never overrides your will. It gives you exactly what you consent to internally. Nothing more. Nothing less. The forgotten prayer is the act of conscious consent. And there comes a moment, quiet and unremarkable, when you realize you no longer need to repeat the words as often. Not because you have stopped believing, but because belief has taken root. The prayer has done its work. The identity has shifted. The words have fulfilled their purpose. From that place, life feels cooperative. Not perfect, but responsive. You trust yourself more. You trust the process more. You trust the unfolding. This trust is not blind. It is earned through experience, through seeing again and again that what you assume with consistency eventually appears. And so, the prayer that was never truly forgotten reveals itself not as a secret formula, but as a way of living. A way of speaking to yourself. A way of interpreting experience. A way of choosing who you are before the world decides for you. You are not waiting for permission. You are not waiting for worthiness. You are not waiting for proof. You are declaring, and the law, faithful and exact, is listening. And when this becomes clear, you stop measuring your life by moments alone. You begin to see patterns. You recognize how long you lived under certain assumptions and how faithfully life mirrored them back to you. This recognition does not bring regret. It brings understanding, and understanding brings peace. Joseph Murphy spoke quietly near the end, not because his conviction weakened, but because he no longer needed to persuade. He knew that truth announces itself to those who are ready. The forgotten prayer was never hidden by secrecy, but by simplicity. People search for complexity, rituals, intermediaries, and formulas, while the power rested in the way they spoke to themselves every day. The prayer works because it restores coherence. When thought, feeling, and identity align, resistance dissolves. Life flows where contradiction once blocked it. Many people unknowingly sabotage themselves by declaring one thing with their lips and another with their inner dialogue. The forgotten prayer reunites the two. You may notice that as you persist, old habits of worry try to return. The mind may reach for familiar fears when uncertainty appears. This is not failure. It is conditioning loosening its grip. Each time you respond with a calm assumption instead of panic, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen the new one. Murphy often reminded his students that the subconscious learns through repetition and emotion, not through force. Gentleness is strength here. The quieter your confidence becomes, the deeper it goes. Loud belief fades quickly. Quiet belief endures. This prayer also reframes waiting. You no longer wait anxiously, you wait expectantly. Expectation is faith without tension. It is the inner knowing that something is unfolding even when nothing appears to be happening. This state alone reshapes timing because impatience delays what trust allows. There is a profound difference between saying, "I am," to convince yourself and saying, "I am," because you have chosen to accept it as true. The first struggles. The second rests. The forgotten prayer leads you from effort into acceptance, and acceptance is where change becomes inevitable. As your assumptions stabilize, you may notice synchronicities increase. Encounters feel timely. Information arrives when needed. Solutions appear without struggle. These are not rewards, they are indicators of alignment. Life responds efficiently to clarity. Joseph Murphy often spoke of gratitude as a natural extension of this prayer. Not gratitude for what might come, but gratitude for what is assumed to already be present. Gratitude seals belief. It signals completion. When you feel thankful for health, peace, or abundance internally, you confirm acceptance. The subconscious responds immediately. The forgotten prayer also teaches discernment. You become aware of which environments strengthen your assumptions and which weaken them. You naturally gravitate toward what reinforces faith and distance yourself from what feeds doubt. This is not avoidance. It is wisdom. Over time, Your inner world becomes less crowded, fewer arguments, fewer justifications, less inner noise. This silence is not emptiness, it is stability. From this stability, intuition speaks clearly. Guidance becomes effortless. Murphy warned against turning the prayer into superstition. It is not about perfect wording or rigid routines, it is about inner agreement. The words are tools, not talismans. Their power lies in the belief they cultivate, not in the syllables themselves. As belief becomes natural, you stop correcting yourself constantly. The new identity speaks automatically. I am capable. I am supported. I am at peace. These thoughts arise spontaneously, without effort. This is the sign that the subconscious has accepted them. The forgotten prayer ultimately restores trust in yourself. You no longer feel fragmented, pulled between hope and fear. You move with a unified inner direction. Decisions become simpler. Doubt loses its authority. And perhaps the most profound shift occurs here. You stop asking why things happened to you and begin asking what assumption created them. This question does not blame. It empowers. It gives you the ability to choose differently next time. Murphy believed that mastery of life begins with mastery of self-talk. Not forced positivity, but conscious identity selection. You cannot control every event, but you can control what you accept as true about yourself within them. That control is enough. As this teaching settles, you may feel a quiet reverence for your own mind. You realize it has always been listening, always responding, always building. The forgotten prayer simply teaches you to speak with care, and so nothing dramatic needs to happen now. No vow, no promise, only awareness. Awareness of the power carried in your inner speech. Awareness of the creative force activated by every assumption. The prayer continues whether you acknowledge it or not. The only question is whether you will speak it unconsciously or deliberately. Because in the end, life does not respond to what you wish for, it responds to what you accept as true. And whatever you consistently accept, you will eventually see. And when you reach this point of understanding, something subtle but profound takes place. You stop feeling as though life is happening to you, and you begin to sense that life is moving through you. Not in a dramatic or mystical way, but in a steady, grounded knowing. You are no longer standing outside your experience, reacting to it. You are participating in it consciously. Joseph Murphy often said that the mind, once disciplined, becomes a sanctuary rather than a battlefield. Most people live in constant internal conflict, arguing with themselves, contradicting their own desires, undoing their intentions with doubt. The forgotten prayer ends this war. It replaces inner argument with inner agreement. And agreement is power. There is a moment when you realize you no longer need to correct every negative thought immediately. You simply let it pass, knowing it no longer holds authority. Authority belongs to what you repeatedly accept, not what briefly appears. This confidence is quiet. It does not announce itself. It simply governs. The prayer also changes how you interpret challenges. Instead of seeing them as signs that something is wrong, you begin to see them as transitional states, old assumptions dissolving, new ones stabilizing. This perspective prevents despair. It keeps you steady during periods of change where impatience once would have pulled you back into old patterns. Murphy emphasized that persistence is not forcing belief, but refusing to abandon it. You do not need to fight doubt. You outgrow it. As belief becomes familiar, doubt loses relevance. The subconscious always chooses what feels most natural. Make faith natural and fear becomes foreign. Over time, you may notice that your desires change. What once felt urgent loses its grip. What remains is clarity. You no longer want things to prove your worth. You want them because they align with who you know yourself to be. This shift alone transforms outcomes, because desire born of identity moves differently than desire born of lack. The forgotten prayer also dissolves the habit of comparison. When you no longer define yourself by external benchmarks, other people's success stops threatening you. You see it as confirmation of possibility, not competition. This frees enormous mental energy that was once spent measuring, judging, and doubting. Joseph Murphy spoke of this as spiritual maturity. Not detachment from life, but freedom within it. You enjoy success without clinging. You face difficulty without collapsing. You trust the process without surrendering your discernment. There is also a deep compassion that emerges from this practice. You recognize that most people are not malicious, but unconscious. They are speaking from old decrees, living from inherited beliefs, repeating scripts they never chose. This understanding softens resentment and releases you from carrying what does not belong to you. The forgotten prayer does not promise a life without contrast. Contrast is part of growth. What it offers is stability within contrast. You no longer feel defined by fluctuations. You remain anchored in assumption, regardless of temporary appearances. Murphy often returned to one essential truth: the subconscious responds to dominance, not intensity. A calm, repeated assumption will always outweigh a dramatic but inconsistent one. This is why gentleness wins. It persists where force exhausts itself. As you continue, you may find that your language changes naturally. Words like always and never fall away. You speak with more openness, more flexibility. This linguistic shift reflects an inner one. You are no longer locking yourself into fixed outcomes. You are allowing the law to work. The prayer also refines patience into trust. You stop demanding immediate results because you understand that acceptance precedes appearance. The seed does not rush the soil, it rests. And in that rest, growth occurs. Joseph Murphy believed that this state of rest is the highest form of faith. Not blind optimism, but settled knowing. A knowing that does not require constant reassurance. A knowing that remains even when nothing seems to be happening. At this stage, the forgotten prayer feels less like something you do and more like something you are. Your inner dialogue becomes supportive by default. You assume solutions rather than obstacles. You expect cooperation rather than resistance. And life responds in kind. You may still speak the words, "I am," consciously from time to time, especially when entering new territory. But you no longer rely on repetition alone. The identity has shifted, the decree has been accepted. Murphy once said that the greatest freedom a person can experience is freedom from their own unconscious patterns. The forgotten prayer offers that freedom, not instantly, not dramatically, but permanently through awareness and choice. And so you do not need to hold on tightly to these words. Let them settle. Let them integrate. Let them become part of how you see yourself. The law does not require effort. It requires alignment. The prayer continues in every thought you accept, every assumption you repeat, every identity you occupy. You are always declaring something. You are always impressing something. The only difference now is that you are aware, and with awareness comes choice. Choose your "I am" carefully. Choose it gently. Choose it consistently, because life is listening. And in this awareness, you begin to sense the quiet dignity of your own mind. You no longer rush to fill silence with worry or prediction. Silence becomes fertile. It becomes the place where new assumptions take root. You discover that the most powerful declarations are often the ones spoken without urgency, without emotional charge, simply accepted as truth. Joseph Murphy often reflected that the subconscious responds most efficiently when the conscious mind stops interfering. Interference comes from overthinking, overanalyzing, and constantly checking for results. The forgotten prayer invites you to step back after the decree is made, to trust the process without hovering over it. Just as you do not dig up a seed to see if it is growing, you do not disturb an assumption once it has been accepted. As this trust develops, fear loses its leverage. Fear feeds on uncertainty and contradiction. When you are no longer divided internally, fear has nowhere to attach. It may still appear, but it no longer governs. It becomes background noise rather than command. You may notice that decisions feel easier, not because choices disappear, but because inner conflict diminishes. You are no longer torn between what you want and what you believe is possible. Possibility expands naturally when belief expands. The forgotten prayer clears the space where indecision once lived. Murphy spoke of this as inner congruence. When what you desire, what you believe, and how you speak align, energy flows cleanly. Fatigue decreases. Motivation feels natural. You stop forcing yourself forward and begin allowing movement to happen. There is also a deepening sense of self-respect that emerges. When you stop declaring against yourself, when you stop rehearsing limitation, You begin to treat yourself differently. You no longer tolerate inner abuse disguised as realism. You speak to yourself as someone you value. This alone transforms how life meets you. The forgotten prayer does not isolate you from pain or difficulty, but it changes how you meet them. You no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" You ask, "What is this teaching me about what I have been assuming?" This question shifts you from victimhood to authorship. Over time, you may find that your faith becomes less dramatic and more reliable. You no longer need constant reassurance or external validation. You trust your inner direction because it has proven itself repeatedly. The law has shown you its consistency. Joseph Murphy believed that this trust was the true inheritance of spiritual understanding. Not miracles, not spectacle, but stability. A stable inner world produces a stable outer life. Even when circumstances change, you remain centered. The forgotten prayer also dissolves the fear of loss. When identity is no longer tied to possessions, roles, or outcomes, loss loses its terror. You know that whatever leaves was not the source. The source remains intact within you. This knowing creates resilience. As this perspective settles, gratitude becomes effortless. Not gratitude forced as a technique, but gratitude that arises naturally from sufficiency. You feel provided for even before evidence appears. This feeling itself becomes evidence in time. Murphy often said that the subconscious cannot distinguish between what you are grateful for now and what you expect to be grateful for later. Gratitude implies possession. Possession implies acceptance. Acceptance triggers expression. This is why gratitude completes the prayer. The forgotten prayer also teaches restraint. You become selective about what you consume mentally. News, conversations, environments that reinforce fear or limitation lose their appeal. Not because you are avoiding reality, but because you are choosing nourishment over noise. In this state, you may find yourself less reactive to others' opinions. Praise does not inflate you. Criticism does not define you. Your sense of self no longer depends on external confirmation. It rests on internal agreement. Joseph Murphy described this as freedom from suggestion. Most people live under constant suggestion from others, from culture, from fear. The forgotten prayer restores self-direction. You decide what ideas are allowed to shape you, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, life begins to mirror this inner order. Relationships align. Opportunities feel timely. Challenges resolve with less friction, not because life has become easier, but because resistance has dissolved. The prayer does not remove effort. It removes struggle. Effort aligned with belief feels purposeful. Struggle arises from contradiction. When contradiction fades, effort becomes expression. At this stage, you may realize that you no longer seek constant improvement. You seek alignment. Improvement follows naturally from alignment. Growth becomes organic rather than forced. Murphy often concluded his teachings with this simple reminder: you do not need to become someone new. You need to stop insisting that you are someone less. The forgotten prayer is not about adding power. It is about ceasing to deny it. And so you carry this understanding quietly. You do not need to convince anyone. You do not need to defend it. You live it, and life responds accordingly. Every day, in small moments, you choose what to accept as true. In those choices, destiny takes shape. Not all at once, but faithfully, consistently, without exception. The prayer continues in the background of your life, steady and exact. It speaks through your assumptions. It moves through your expectations. It expresses through your experience. You are not separate from it. You are the one speaking it. And whatever you continue to declare, life will continue to become. And eventually, you stop thinking of the prayer as something you practice at all. It becomes the atmosphere of your mind, a quiet baseline of trust beneath every thought, every decision, every response. You are no longer checking yourself constantly, wondering if you are doing it right. The law is no longer theoretical. It has become experiential. Joseph Murphy once said that when belief is established, effort disappears. You do not need to remind yourself that you are breathing. You do not need to convince yourself that gravity exists. In the same way, when an assumption becomes natural, you no longer need to repeat it forcefully. It operates automatically. This is the mark of true acceptance. At this stage, many people notice that life feels simpler, not smaller, but cleaner. Fewer inner negotiations, less mental clutter. You are no longer entertaining endless what-ifs because your identity is no longer fragile. You trust yourself to respond wisely whatever appears. That trust is powerful. The forgotten prayer also changes how you experience time. Urgency fades. You stop racing against imagined deadlines. You understand that outcomes unfold in harmony with acceptance, not pressure. This removes a great deal of unnecessary suffering. You move with life instead of pushing against it. Murphy often described this as cooperation with the infinite. Not submission, but partnership. You supply the assumption. The law supplies the expression. Each has its role. When you try to do both, strain appears. When you trust the division, ease returns. There is also a deep relief that comes from releasing the need to control details. Control is often a symptom of doubt. When belief is steady, micromanagement feels unnecessary. You take inspired action and then let go. You speak the decree and then live your life. As this becomes habitual, you may notice that even challenges lose their emotional charge. They no longer feel personal, they feel procedural. Something to be addressed, not something to fear. This emotional neutrality allows solutions to appear faster because panic no longer blocks perception. Joseph Murphy believed that most suffering comes not from events themselves, but from the meaning we assign to them. The forgotten prayer changes meaning at the root. When you assume guidance, even obstacles feel guided. When you assume support, even delays feel purposeful. The prayer also brings a kind of inner maturity. You stop dramatizing your own experiences. You stop needing constant reassurance. You become comfortable with uncertainty because your certainty no longer depends on outcomes. It depends on identity. At this level, faith is no longer emotional. It is structural. It is built into how you think. You no longer oscillate wildly between hope and despair. You remain centered. This stability is what allows life to reorganize around you. Murphy often warned against turning this understanding into ego. The power does not come from personal will, but from alignment with law. When you remember this, humility and confidence coexist naturally. You are neither inflated nor diminished. You are simply aligned. The forgotten prayer also restores wonder. Not the anxious wonder of waiting for signs, but the quiet appreciation of how effortlessly life responds once resistance is removed. Small things begin to feel meaningful again. Progress feels satisfying without being dramatic. You may also notice that your inner language becomes kinder. Harsh self-judgment fades. You stop speaking to yourself as an adversary. You become an ally to your own mind. This inner alliance changes everything. Joseph Murphy often said that the mind thrives on encouragement, not false flattery, but steady affirmation of truth. When you encourage yourself through assumption, the subconscious responds with cooperation. When you criticize yourself, it responds with obstruction. The forgotten prayer teaches you to be deliberate without being rigid, flexible without being vague. You hold your assumption firmly, but you allow life to choose the route. This balance prevents disappointment and preserves trust. And then there comes a moment, often unnoticed, when you realize that the things you once prayed for no longer feel distant. Not because they have all arrived, but because they no longer feel separate from you. You expect them the way you expect tomorrow, calmly, naturally. This is when the prayer has fulfilled its purpose. You are no longer reaching for a better future. You are living from a better assumption. The future simply follows. Joseph Murphy believed this was the true meaning of faith, not belief in a distant promise, but acceptance of a present truth. When you accept the truth of who you are, life arranges itself to match it, and so there is nothing left to add. No final technique, no closing ritual, only continuation of awareness, continuation of deliberate speech, continuation of chosen identity. You will still speak, I am, every day. The only difference now is that you will hear it. And whatever you continue to declare with quiet certainty, life will continue to express. And in this continued awareness, you begin to recognize how gently the law operates. It does not rush you. It does not demand perfection. It simply reflects consistency. You may falter, forget, or slip into old habits for a moment, and nothing is lost. The dominant assumption always prevails. Return to it calmly, and the course corrects itself. Joseph Murphy often reassured those who worried about doing it wrong. He reminded them that the subconscious is patient. It responds to what is repeated, not what is occasional. One fearful thought does not undo months of faith. One moment of doubt does not erase a cultivated identity. What matters is what you live from most of the time. This understanding removes fear of failure from the practice itself. You no longer police your thoughts obsessively. You simply redirect them when needed. Like guiding a river back to its channel, not scolding the water for flowing. This kindness toward yourself strengthens belief far more than discipline alone ever could. As the prayer becomes woven into daily life, you may notice how differently you listen. Conversations no longer pull you into old narratives so easily. When someone speaks of limitation, complaint, or fear, you hear it without absorbing it. You understand it as their current assumption, not a universal truth. This discernment protects your inner environment without hardening your heart. Murphy spoke of this as spiritual immunity, not resistance to life, but selectivity. You choose which ideas are allowed to shape you. This choice, practiced consistently, keeps the subconscious clear and responsive. There is also a quiet joy that emerges from this practice. Not excitement tied to outcomes, but contentment rooted in identity. You feel grounded even when circumstances fluctuate. This groundedness attracts stability because it no longer sends mixed signals to the law. The forgotten prayer also teaches you to honor timing without surrendering expectation. You understand that acceptance comes first, then expression. You stop asking when and start resting in already. This shift alone removes tension and opens pathways that urgency once blocked. Joseph Murphy believed that the greatest gift of this prayer was not material success, but inner freedom. Freedom from fear-driven thinking. Freedom from inherited beliefs. Freedom from unconscious repetition. With this freedom, any form of success becomes sustainable. As your inner world stabilizes, you may notice that creativity increases. New ideas arise effortlessly. Solutions appear spontaneously. This is not coincidence. A mind no longer occupied with worry has space to receive insight. Guidance flows where noise once dominated. The prayer also reshapes how you experience setbacks. Instead of seeing them as reversals, you see them as adjustments. Something refining, redirecting, clarifying. This perspective prevents discouragement and keeps momentum intact. Murphy often said that discouragement is simply a misinterpretation of delay. When you assume success, delay does not threaten belief. It becomes part of the process. This calm endurance is what allows belief to mature into knowing. And as knowing deepens, words become fewer but stronger. You speak with intention, you listen more, you trust the silence between actions. In that silence, the law works most efficiently. The forgotten prayer does not ask you to withdraw from the world. It asks you to engage from alignment, to work, love, decide, and act from a stable inner position. When you do this, effort feels purposeful rather than exhausting. Joseph Murphy often observed that people who live this way appear calm under pressure, not because they avoid responsibility, but because they no longer carry unnecessary weight. They know where power resides, and they do not waste it. At some point, you may notice that gratitude arises even for challenges. Not because challenges are pleasant, but because you trust their role. This trust transforms experience. What once felt like opposition now feels like participation. The prayer continues to operate quietly, shaping your expectations, guiding your responses, refining your perception. You do not need to announce it. You do not need to prove it. Its effects speak for themselves. And so you walk forward with a lighter step, not because life has promised ease, but because you have claimed alignment. You are no longer arguing with reality. You are cooperating with it. The forgotten prayer remains simple: identity accepted, feeling aligned. Expectation steady, nothing more is required, nothing less will suffice. You will still encounter uncertainty. You will still face choice, but you will meet them differently now, from a place of inner agreement rather than inner conflict. And in that agreement, life finds its cue. Because whatever you consistently accept as true about yourself, the world will continue to reflect. And as this reflection continues, you may begin to sense how little effort true change actually requires. Most of the strain you once felt came not from life itself, but from resisting what was already unfolding. Resistance drains energy, alignment restores it. The forgotten prayer teaches alignment first, and everything else follows naturally. Joseph Murphy often described the subconscious as obedient, not intelligent in the way the conscious mind is. It does not reason, it follows. When you give it a clear, consistent identity to express, it moves efficiently. Confusion only arises when the command is mixed. Clarity is kindness to the mind. This clarity also reshapes how you experience success. When success arrives, it does not shock you. It feels familiar. It feels appropriate. This familiarity is proof that the assumption preceded the event. Anything that surprises you has not yet been accepted internally. The forgotten prayer ensures that when things arrive, they feel natural rather than miraculous. There is also a quiet confidence that grows from this practice. You stop seeking reassurance from others. You no longer need constant feedback to validate your direction. You trust your inner alignment because it has proven itself. This independence is not isolation, it is self-trust. Murphy often reminded his listeners that self-trust is the foundation of all faith. If you do not trust your own assumptions, you cannot trust the law to express them. Trust grows through experience, and experience grows through consistent application. The forgotten prayer creates that loop. As this trust deepens, you may find that your emotional reactions soften. Situations that once provoked anger or anxiety no longer carry the same charge. You respond rather than react. This emotional stability changes outcomes more than force ever could. The prayer also dissolves the fear of being wrong. You understand that assumptions can be adjusted. Nothing is final. Nothing is fixed. If something does not align with your desired experience, you simply change the inner decree. There is no punishment, only feedback. Joseph Murphy believed that this flexibility was essential. Rigidity creates pressure, flexibility allows flow. The forgotten prayer is firm in identity, but gentle in execution. It does not cling, it allows. You may notice that your sense of purpose becomes clearer. Not because you have defined it intellectually, but because it emerges naturally from who you accept yourself to be. Purpose is not discovered through searching. It is revealed through alignment. At this point, the prayer feels less like words and more like orientation, a way of facing the world, a way of interpreting events, a way of speaking inwardly that keeps you grounded regardless of circumstances. Murphy often said that the highest use of the subconscious is not to get things, but to become whole. When you are whole, things follow as byproducts. This wholeness is the true aim of the forgotten prayer, and so you move forward without urgency, without desperation, without fear. You know that whatever needs to adjust will adjust. Whatever needs to appear will appear. Your role is simply to remain aligned with the identity you have chosen. This does not mean you never feel doubt. It means doubt no longer defines you. It becomes a passing state, not a governing force. The governing force is assumption, and assumption has been chosen consciously. Joseph Murphy believed that when this understanding settles, life becomes less dramatic and more meaningful. You no longer chase extremes. You value stability. You appreciate progress without needing spectacle. This maturity is itself a manifestation. The forgotten prayer continues to work quietly in the background. It shapes your expectations. It guides your attention. It influences your choices. You do not need to think about it constantly. It is already active. And so there is nothing to add, nothing to force, nothing to prove. Only continuity. Continuity of awareness. Continuity of deliberate identity. Continuity of trust. You are always declaring something. You are always assuming something. You are always becoming something. Now you know. And what you know, lived consistently, becomes your life. And with this knowing, a deep steadiness takes root. You no longer feel the need to announce your faith or explain your understanding. It becomes private, internal, unquestioned. The forgotten prayer settles beneath the surface of thought, shaping your responses before words ever form. You act from alignment without naming it. Joseph Murphy often noted that when belief is real, it does not argue, it does not defend itself. It simply operates. You recognize this in yourself when you stop rehearsing outcomes and start expecting coherence. The mind becomes less busy, not because life has fewer demands, but because contradiction has dissolved. You begin to notice how often peace is a choice, not a circumstance. When you accept yourself as guided, confusion loses its authority. When you accept yourself as supported, anxiety loosens its grip. When you accept yourself as capable, hesitation fades. These shifts are quiet, but their effects are unmistakable. The forgotten prayer also transforms how you experience effort. Effort no longer feels heavy or draining. It feels focused, directed. You expend energy where it matters and conserve it where it does not. This efficiency is the natural result of clarity. A clear mind wastes nothing. Murphy spoke of this as right use of power. Power misused becomes strain. Power aligned becomes ease. The prayer does not give you power. It teaches you how to stop misdirecting it. As days pass, you may find that your confidence becomes less emotional and more grounded. You are not constantly uplifted, but you are rarely shaken. This stability allows you to move through uncertainty without losing yourself. You remain present, attentive, responsive. The prayer also reframes success and failure. Success no longer defines you and failure no longer diminishes you. Both become experiences rather than identities. This detachment paradoxically allows greater success because fear of loss no longer interferes with action. Joseph Murphy believed that the ultimate freedom is freedom from identification with outcomes. When you identify with alignment instead, outcomes become flexible, they adjust, they respond, you remain intact. You may also notice that your sense of time softens. You are less preoccupied with how long things take. You trust that what is accepted will appear in its proper sequence. This trust removes pressure and invites flow. The forgotten prayer does not promise control over life. It promises cooperation with it. When you stop resisting your own power, life meets you halfway. Circumstances rearrange with less friction. Solutions emerge with less struggle. And gradually, you realize that the prayer was never something you needed to remember consciously. It was always active. It was always shaping your life. The only change was awareness. Awareness turned habit into choice. Joseph Murphy often said that enlightenment is not acquiring something new, but recognizing what has always been operating. The forgotten prayer is simply the recognition that your inner speech has always been creative. And so, you continue living, working, loving, speaking. But now, there is intention behind the words, behind the assumptions. Trust beneath the actions. You do not need to repeat the lesson. Life will repeat it for you, gently, faithfully, in every experience that mirrors what you accept as true. Because the Lord does not pause. The mind does not stop receiving. An identity does not remain neutral. What you live from today becomes what you meet tomorrow. And the prayer goes on. And as the prayer goes on, you may begin to notice something even more subtle, a deep sense of safety that does not depend on circumstances. This safety does not come from guarantees or assurances about the future. It comes from knowing that whatever arises, you are equipped to meet it. When identity is stable, uncertainty loses its threat. Joseph Murphy often said that fear is not caused by events, but by the belief that we are unprepared for them. The forgotten prayer dissolves this belief at the root. When you accept yourself as guided, resourced, and capable, fear no longer has a foundation. It may still appear briefly, but it cannot take hold. This inner safety changes how you relate to risk. You are no longer reckless, but you are no longer paralyzed. You move forward when intuition prompts you, not when fear permits you. This distinction alone opens doors that once seemed inaccessible. The prayer also changes how you experience solitude. Time alone no longer feels empty or heavy. It feels restorative. Silence becomes a companion rather than something to escape. In silence, assumptions clarify. In quiet moments, you hear your own direction more clearly. Murphy believed that the subconscious speaks most clearly when the conscious mind relaxes. This is why insights often arise during rest, walks, or moments of calm. When you are no longer fighting yourself, guidance flows naturally. As this becomes your way of being, you may notice that your goals simplify. You no longer chase everything at once. You focus on what feels aligned. This focus is not limitation, it is precision. And precision amplifies results. The forgotten prayer also refines ambition. Ambition driven by lack exhausts. Ambition driven by identity energizes. When you pursue goals as expressions of who you are, rather than remedies for what you think you lack, effort becomes sustainable. Joseph Murphy often spoke of this as inspired desire, not desire born of comparison or fear, but desire that arises naturally from self-acceptance. Such desire does not conflict with peace. It enhances it. You may also find that forgiveness becomes easier, not because others have changed, but because you no longer need them to validate your worth. When identity is internally secure, resentment loses its grip. You release it not for others, but for yourself. The prayer continues to work quietly in moments like these, in how you interpret a delay, in how you respond to criticism, in how you speak to yourself after a mistake. Each moment is an opportunity to reinforce alignment or revert to old patterns. Awareness gives you choice. Murphy often reminded his students that mastery is not measured by perfection, but by recovery. How quickly you return to alignment after drifting. How gently you correct without condemnation. The forgotten prayer supports recovery, not rigidity. Over time, you may notice that your sense of self becomes less reactive to external noise. Trends, opinions, and expectations lose their power to sway you. You remain informed but not controlled, engaged but not absorbed. This inner independence allows you to participate in life fully without losing yourself. You can care deeply without becoming entangled. You can commit without becoming consumed. This balance is rare, and it is a natural result of identity stability. Joseph Murphy believed that this balance was the true sign of spiritual maturity. Not withdrawal from the world, but presence within it without inner conflict. The forgotten prayer leads here naturally, without force. And so, you continue forward, not chasing certainty, but living from it. You do not need to predict every outcome. You trust the alignment that shapes them. This trust is quiet, but it is strong. The prayer remains active in every assumption you accept, every word you choose, every meaning you assign. You are always participating in creation, whether consciously or unconsciously. Now, participation is deliberate, and life responds, as it always has, faithfully, precisely, without exception. And as this deliberate participation deepens, you begin to recognize a truth that once felt distant. Nothing in your life has ever been random. What appeared as coincidence was alignment. What felt like misfortune was an assumption unfolding. What seemed like delay was preparation. This realization does not make you rigid or detached. It makes you attentive. Joseph Murphy often said that awareness is the greatest power a human being can possess. Not awareness of the world, but awareness of oneself, of one's own inner declarations, of the silent agreements made daily with fear or faith. The forgotten prayer sharpens this awareness until it becomes second nature. You may notice that you listen differently now, not just to others, but to yourself. You catch the subtle inner statements that once went unnoticed. The quiet, "this won't work," the habitual, "I'm not ready," the familiar, "it's always hard." And instead of judging them, you simply recognize them as old instructions. Instructions that can be replaced. Replacement becomes gentle, almost automatic. A calm, "I am capable," a steady, "I am supported," a quiet, "this works out." There is no drama in this correction, no force, just redirection. And over time, the new language becomes the default. The forgotten prayer also reshapes how you experience success when it arrives. You do not cling to it because you no longer fear losing it. You understand that success is not a single event, but a pattern born of belief, and beliefs can be maintained. Murphy believed that sustainability was the true test of any manifestation. Anything gained through strain is difficult to keep. Anything gained through alignment remains because it rests on identity rather than effort. The forgotten prayer builds from identity. As identity stabilizes, generosity increases. Not because you feel obligated, but because you feel sufficient. When you are no longer guarding against lack, you share naturally. Time, attention, kindness, resources. This generosity further reinforces abundance. because the subconscious associates giving with having. The prayer also changes how you experience authority. You no longer seek it from others, nor do you impose it. You carry it quietly. People sense it in your presence, in your calm, in your certainty. This unspoken authority opens doors without confrontation. Joseph Murphy often observed that people respond more to assumption than to persuasion. When you assume respect, you are treated respectfully. When you assume worth, you are valued. The world mirrors your inner posture. You may also notice that you recover more quickly from emotional disruptions. Disappointment still arises, but it does not linger. You feel it, acknowledge it, and move on. The inner decree remains intact. This resilience is one of the most practical gifts of the forgotten prayer. The prayer does not remove emotion. It removes identification with emotion. You experience feelings without becoming them. You remain rooted in identity even as states pass through. This distinction preserves balance. Murphy often said that emotional maturity was not the absence of feeling, but the presence of self-awareness. The forgotten prayer cultivates this awareness steadily, without pressure. As this continues, you may find that your faith becomes quieter and deeper. You no longer speak of it often. You simply live from it. You no longer look for confirmation. Experience provides it. And when doubts arise, as they occasionally will, you do not panic. You recognize them as echoes of old conditioning. You return to your assumption calmly. This calm return is itself an act of faith. The forgotten prayer does not promise a life without challenge. It promises a life without inner chaos. Challenges become navigable. Decisions become clearer. Consequences become manageable. Joseph Murphy believed that clarity was the greatest blessing a human being could receive. With clarity, even difficulty becomes purposeful. Without it, even comfort feels empty. The forgotten prayer restores clarity by restoring inner agreement. And so, you move forward not as someone waiting to be saved, but as someone who understands how life responds. You no longer plead, you no longer bargain. You assume, you align, you allow. The prayer continues in every moment you choose your identity over your fear. In every word you speak with intention. In every meaning you assign consciously, and life, exact and faithful, continues to answer. And now there is nothing more to seek, nothing more to uncover, nothing more to add. The circle closes where it began, not with effort, but with recognition. The forgotten prayer was never hidden in books, teachers, or final words. It lived quietly in every moment you defined yourself. It waited in every sentence that began with, "I am." It worked faithfully whether you were aware of it or not. What has changed is not the law. What has changed is you. You now understand that prayer is not something you do occasionally. It is something you are always doing. Every assumption is a prayer. Every identity you accept is a decree. Every belief you allow to settle becomes a command carried out without delay or debate. You were never powerless. You were never abandoned. You were never ignored. Life has been listening the entire time, responding with perfect accuracy to what you accepted as true. The answers you received were not judgments, they were reflections. And now you stand at a quiet threshold. Not the beginning of something new, but the return to something original. The return to conscious authorship, to deliberate identity, to speaking inwardly with care, respect, and intention. From this moment forward, you will still say "I am" many times each day. The difference is that you will feel the weight of those words. You will hear them as instructions. You will choose them as seeds. And you will watch, patiently and confidently, as life grows exactly what you have planted. You do not need to force belief. You do not need to fight doubt. You do not need to prove anything to anyone. You only need to remain consistent with what you choose to accept as true. Because the law is simple, the law is exact, and the law is always at work. What you assume, you become. What you accept, you experience. What you declare with conviction, life must express. This is the prayer that was never truly forgotten. It lives in you now. It always has.